Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy. This is a special series on the topic of relationships matter, and today I am joined by Pauline Scott from Scotland. Hi Pauline, how are you?
I am very well, Jane, and I am delighted to be here with you this morning.
And I am very, very delighted and excited and thrilled to have you with me, Pauline. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Not at all. Thank you for asking me.
So Pauline, I kind of ask everyone to just begin by telling me a bit about themselves. So if you could share a little bit of information about yourself and your background, that would be great, please.
Yeah, I will. Thank you, Jane. I am currently the Managing Director of the Tigers Group. The Tigers Group incorporates our Learn with Tigers, which is primarily based in vocational education with young people, 16 to 24. We have Lullaby Lane Nurseries, which is childcare for children aged 0 to 5. And we have just launched our new organisation called Paradigm Landscapes. And Paradigm Landscapes was an aim of ours to have an organisation that is supportive of people coming from the justice system and into employment. So our commitment at Paradigm is that a minimum of 25% of our workforce will come from the justice community. Fabulous. So we have very much evolved over the last, so that's 20 years. So we'll be Tigers will be 21, our training company this year, and we're very much evolved. And I think the evolution has probably started, Jane, with shifting the way in which we think about ourselves. So I've just told you what we do, but lots at Tigers, we talk about why we do what we do. So we start with why. We start with what is this big idealistic vision of this world? What do we want it to look like? Why does our organisation need to exist? And what do we value? And what we aim to do at Tigers is that we aim to inspire and support people to develop their infinite potential. And then how we do that is through our relationship-led practice approach, our commitment to relationships, understanding them, understanding ourselves and others, and then what we do can change. So they're all just what's, but ultimately what our vision is for the world is for a fair and equal world for individuals, families and communities. And I'll never see that in my lifetime, Jane. It is idealistic, but the progress is okay. So as long as we're moving in the right direction. So that's part of our group. And it's been an exciting journey. It's been a challenging journey. And on top of all that, I'm a mother of 2 children. I try to be a wife. I try to be a good daughter. So I am a working woman, and that has its challenges too.
It does indeed, does indeed. I'm trying to be a wife as well, Pauline. It's not always easy. So I've met you a couple of times in Scotland. They were happy days when I got to, go over to the ACEWare Nation events that you were involved in organising in a very exciting way. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But I have a sense of you as well as a leader and employer from my little involvement with IWIL, the mentoring group for women. But can you tell me about yourself as a leader and an employer, and whether your leadership style and understanding of the power of relationships has changed over time, Pauline?
You're very perceptive, Jane. It has changed a lot. And it's not really probably my leadership style that's changed, it's me as a person that's changed. And I think that's probably a fundamental change, is that I don't really talk about myself in that term. I just talk about myself as a person, as a human being. And I think it's been learning about relationships, learning about attachment theory, learning about your environment and your experiences in early childhood that has fundamentally made me so much more self-aware as a human being, as a person. And we talk a lot at Tigers about you bring your whole self to work, that your body doesn't really understand that you actually walk through a set of doors and you have to be a different person. So my body doesn't know that I'm in my work or I'm in my home. What it does do is it reacts to lots of situations, it reacts to people, it reacts to threat or perceived threat. So what I have done in my leadership, but probably just in my learning, is to learn much more about myself. And then that has translated into my leadership style. So types of things that would be different. I think when I first started out in management, I was old school management. You keep yourself a little bit aloof, you keep yourself a bit back, you don't show your vulnerabilities, you definitely don't show your weaknesses, you should know the answer to everything. You're the person that's sitting at the top. So I was quite guarded, but I wasn't like that naturally as a person. But I was like that in my business, and I was like that in my management style. And actually what I've learned is that that's not what influences people, it's not what inspires people, and it's not what really creates that depth of relational experience. So I'm much more vulnerable, Jane, than I've ever been, although I find it quite difficult at times because it's not naturally who I would be. So I'm much more open as a person. I'm much more willing to take help. I am much more willing to say that I don't have the answers, actually. And I'm much more willing to explore who I am as a person. And I think that has fundamentally changed the way in which I lead and which I live my life, actually. And
fascinating. And it makes a lot of sense to me because Gabor Mate's stuff about authenticity, and James Doherty also talks about authenticity. I mean, we feel it when people are being truthful in their essence, I suppose. And if you as a leader felt you had to have a bit of a wall or a kind of a professional decorum, it was probably a bit isolating and lonely as well when you have to have a bit of a facade to seem professional at all times.
Absolutely. Actually, Jane, do you know what I think I've recognized is that it's unsustainable. And that search, because my search was for perfectionism.
Right.
My search was always this innate need to feel good enough and never be exposed for any weaknesses. So that was a search then for perfection, which is completely impossible and actually completely unsustainable and unfulfilling. So I definitely am a much more authentic person. I'm messier than what I ever used to be. I think I'm kinder to myself though than I ever used to be. And I think I'm kinder to other people. And I would have always said to you that I was a kind and compassionate person, but I think I'm less judgmental of other people and less judgmental of myself. And that has actually been really beneficial for me as a person, but it's been really beneficial from business as well, actually. So I'm much more willing to look beyond people's behavior. I think a lot of my focus was on behavior.
Sure.
And conforming and doing what I thought was the right thing to do, rather than emotions and feelings. So I've shifted that, and it definitely is a lot more vulnerable and it's a lot more messy.
Yeah. Can I ask, do you think that being a woman contributed to your quest for perfectionism and maybe feeling not good enough, Pauline, or wanting to, prove yourself perhaps?
I think there was two major factors in that. I think I was raised by the most loving, caring parents, especially my mother, who spent her whole life striving for acceptance and perfection, and lived her life with lots of anxiety. And I think the more that I've learned about my own attachment style, I've started to recognize that that's the way in which I held on to relationships, was to be that perfect person, to be that person that was always there for other people. I think that naturally led me into a leadership role, but I don't always think my leadership was healthy. So my intention was probably one of self-fulfillment as opposed to thinking about real genuine service for other people. So I think that is one probably root of why, I am the way I am. But I think in terms of management, I absolutely, and I said this to somebody just last week, actually, I think as a woman, I started to work against what were my natural feminine instincts when I first started out in management. And the very caring, nurturing side of me, I think I removed that at times to be taken more seriously, to be less emotional, because as a child, I was always extremely emotional, Jane. And that was my kind of persona in the household. There's Pauline, she's crying again. And I used to perceive that as a bit of a weakness, well, in fact, a real weakness. And then I've recognized actually my sensitivities and my emotions are part of why I do what I do. And actually lots of what we do at Tigers and Lullaby Lane and Paradigm wouldn't exist if I didn't have those sensitivities and that empathy. But I think I worked against that quite a lot, to be taken more seriously and not get as involved with the people when I first started out my very early management and supervisory, it was in retail management. Oh, I used to argue with everybody at a higher level, Jane. And I used to fight for the people that were in my department about what wasn't just and what wasn't fair. And I think everybody in senior management hated me. I was a pest. But I always had this sense of, injustice, but I was really emotionally attached to it. And then I think I got a few knocks where I started to go, okay, keep yourself more guarded. To be taken seriously as a woman in business, you have to be less emotional. So I think I worked against my instincts. Whereas now I think I completely embrace those. And I don't even see them now as so gender specific.
Yes.
But I do certainly think about the way in which I was raised. Still at that time, it was very much that women do the nurturing and they take care of the men and they take care of the family. So even that, Jane, and that caused a lot of conflict in my head, that my brother and I were raised the exact same way, same education, opportunities. And then even once I had my daughter and I was married, my mum would turn around and say things like, are you not going home to make your husband's dinner? And I think, okay, so the conflict in that was unbelievable to me. And this was a woman who I think was, she wanted me to go on and do well. She encouraged all that. She's seen my brother and I overall as equal. Yeah. And yet her upbringing and her generation, that was quite conflicting to her, actually. And she gave me some messages.
The other thing, though, in terms of emotions, is emotions are not female. I mean, they don't have a gender or a sex. And we have educated boys and girls and men and women and everyone in between, that they are to be kind of repressed and kept in control and not welcomed and not understood even, because they're not what make us human is the dominant narrative. I think it's like our cortex, our ability to think and be rational is what makes us human. Whereas when you actually understand a bit about the brain and attachment and its function, we can't actually be human without experiencing the full range of emotions. Isn't that right, Pauline? They're not to be squished down.
I totally agree with that. And actually, if I take that back to my early experiences and my family experiences, and probably even, Jane, the way I opened up Lullaby Lane nurseries, I didn't like to see children's pain at all. I actually couldn't cope with seeing children's pain. So when we opened Lullaby Lane, if children were crying, I used to come out quickly. Why is that child crying? Right, let's stop that child crying. I couldn't sit and hold a child's emotions because it was too painful for me. And when I started to really delve into understanding things like containment, emotional containment, and attachment styles, I started to recognize actually that's probably culturally the way we were in my family. Extremely loving, extremely demonstrative about feelings, but actually when the feelings got messy or difficult, there was a desire to fix that and shut that down, and it was completely unintentional. And I think that's what's really important to me, is that actually you can cause damage unintentionally. Loving parents can actually create some damage. And I say that because I did it myself. So I didn't learn about attachment theory until my son was about 5 or 6 and my daughter was about 10. And I didn't know what I know now. And I often think I wish I had known this before I had them. Yeah.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Because I can see them now in moments of struggle and emotional struggle. And I go, okay, that is because of a pattern of behavior. That's a pattern of emotions. And I've been part of that. My husband's been part of that. But we only knew what we knew at the time. So learning about this actually in some way was quite frightening, because then I did reflect on my own parenting, how I had been parented and raised. And then I had to move to a place of self-forgiveness quite quickly. And say, well, you were doing the best with what you actually had. And now that I know better, I do something better. Otherwise, again, you would go into that place of shame and just go, oh my goodness, what have I done? But I can still see moments where I go, okay, I tried to suppress my children's feelings through love.
Yes.
and through my own inability to face pain, actually.
And face anger, you know, I mean, we love to try and manage anger without understanding it, and often understanding that there can be fear underneath it, or shame, or whatever else. So it's so interesting. And in terms of the leadership again and managing people, do you now have, because you've a greater understanding of emotions and relationships and brain development and survival responses and the like, do you find it easier to kind of, I guess, not forgive bad behavior, but kind of be curious about it? Maybe, I know Suzanne Zedijk says, you know, be curious. Curious is nearly her mantra. Do you find yourself being curious a lot more now, Pauline?
Absolutely. And, you know, we use that term of look beyond the behaviour. And that came from my colleague, Jane Evans, when she came to work at Lullaby Lane, and to be able to explore that. And I think one of the things that's helped me to do that with the team at Tigers is not having the sense that I'm responsible for everybody's feelings.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what came with it, Jane. I think I felt responsible to stop anybody's pain. And then I would offer that so freely. And then I would get quite overwhelmed by it. And then when I was too overwhelmed, I could come out in a very negative response. Okay. So then I could come out more angry. Yeah. So then it's inconsistent. So for a team working with a leader or working with a colleague who is inconsistent, that brings lots of moments of fear. And then what I hadn't understood, which I now understand, is that those people also brought all of their own experiences into the workplace. So my behaviors could trigger an emotional response in them that I was completely unaware of. And then people could shut down. They would come and ask me for help, even though I was saying words like, you know, my door's always open, come and ask me for help. But it could have been in moments of just my reaction, my emotional reaction, where people go, oh no, it's too scary. I can't ask her, I can't tell her that. So I've had to do lots of that self-reflection and be very aware of myself when I'm sitting with the team, but also just to create a holding space that people can talk. So one of the things that we do at Tigers now is we do emotional check-ins. Yeah, okay. So it's not about what are you doing in your job, you know, where are you with that task? It's how are you feeling about it? That's a fundamental shift in language, which means then the conversation starts from an emotional place. Yeah. Which means, again, that might get messy. So people in our team might then say, because you're creating a safety, people then might tell you things that are happening in their life. In fact, that happens lots of times. Yeah. People do that. And then you've got to hold, Jane, okay, I hear that, and we can talk about that. And we still need this work to be done here. And that's quite a fine line to walk. And that's a real balance that we've had to support our leadership team to think about, because we talk about human leadership. And human leadership is not letting people do whatever they want without holding strong boundaries. So boundaries, emotional boundaries have been so helpful to me and helpful to our team to think about how do you offer, as Mark Finnis will say, high support and high challenge. Right. And I think that's what we're doing. I think we are trying to understand why people are feeling the way they're feeling, what their anxieties might be. We're trying to support them in that. We're trying to make an environment which makes that more conducive, but also we have a job to do and we have standards to set. So you can't phone in every day sick. Yeah. You know, we need you to come to your work. How can we support you to help that? Where are you feeling that anxiety? What methods are we going to put in place? And what is your personal responsibility too? And the way in which I think helps myself and the rest of the leadership team to hold people to that personal account responsibility is by giving them this knowledge. Yes. Because if they don't have the knowledge, they don't know how to manage their own nervous system. They don't understand what's triggered them. They don't understand maybe their patterns of relational experiences, their developmental experiences that have brought them to where they are in their life. But if you give this information to people, my experience is that it's really empowering for them. Yeah. that it really helps them to make sense of themselves. And then from my point as a leader, then I go, okay, we're providing you with this knowledge, we're providing you with this information, we're creating a psychologically safe environment. And I now feel safe to hold you accountable.
Yes.
For what you're doing. And then I hold myself accountable for what I'm doing. And I think that's really strong boundaries. So
Yeah.
I think people worry then that you lose a standard within an organization or within your parenting, is attachment theory saying that children can do whatever they want and we should just be hugging children all over the place. I don't think it's as simplistic as that, and absolutely not. There's still boundaries. There's still a parent's requirement to say no to their child,
yes,
which is very healthy for them.
Yes,
and that's the rupture. That's the rupture and repair.
Yes,
you sit alongside them when you've said no. I'm sorry, you can't have a second chocolate bar.
Yeah,
they're distraught about it, and you can hold them in that and just acknowledge emotions and feelings. So I think that has fundamentally helped me to set those boundaries. And then I think then I'm a more compassionate person, and I think I can sustain that longer, actually, Jane, than I think I probably had poor boundaries before.
Right.
And yeah.
Apologies, Pauline, that it makes an awful lot of sense to me, even though I'm not a leader and managing people, but just the kind of growth and the power of knowledge is amazing. I mean, it doesn't mean that you'll transform yourself overnight, because there's a lot of instinctual responses and patterns, but at least you can check yourself and go, I did it again, or why am I responding to Pauline's serious face in a way like that I feel nearly under attack? Where does that come from? But just one question, when you were talking there about the safe holding space for your staff, do you have a safe holding space for you as a leader? Are there people to whom you can go to, at times of vulnerability, or just to talk things through? Like, I know you're very good friends with Suzanne. Are there people in your world who understand what you're trying to do as a leader, and the cost that, being more emotionally vulnerable can cost a person, maybe?
I think that's a great point. And I think that's such an important point, because it is emotionally challenging. It is emotionally draining at times. You're bringing your whole self. I'm all in for my job. And again, I think my ability to be able to ask for help has allowed me then to talk to more people. I think I always thought somewhere, Jane, if your family relationships were really healthy, you could do all that in your family.
Okay.
And actually what I've recognized is absolutely not, because again, you're bringing lots of that historical. So again, my father, who has been a great mentor for me in business as well, is in my life. But if I tell him challenges that I'm facing, he still has that natural pattern of wanting it to stop.
Yeah, okay.
So he's not, I mean, God love him, he's fantastic, but he's not great at just holding that space and hearing it. But I'm able to now use some of that language and say, Dad, you don't need to fix this. We can just talk about it. So I think that has been really important for me then, to be able to allow colleagues or even to seek therapeutical support. And I have done that as well, which again, there's a time gone by, Jane, I'd have been ashamed to say that.
Right.
I'd went to see a therapist, but actually I'm holding quite a lot in my life.
Yeah, sure.
We're running these organizations, parenting, marriage, my mother's illness through Alzheimer's. That's a lot to hold, actually. And actually just having a space where you can just unpack some of that, I've found really, really beneficial. And I think that's probably one of the things that's happened with I Will. And I know we're going to talk about I Will in terms of our mentoring program. I think we've created a community where actually there's women supporting other women who are in leadership roles. And that's not necessarily leadership roles, I'm the head of an organization. That is people who are just trying to be brave in what they do every day and lead themselves, and just to create space to talk about that. So I have found that really helpful. And I have a small group of people that I feel really safe with, to be able to really explore some of those feelings. And I think that's really important. And I won't overshare, Jane.
Yeah.
So I never say anything that I know the next day I might go, oh, that was too much. So I don't overshare. So I think my judgment on that is wise. So I choose where I'm going to share some of that information.
Thanks, Pauline. I just asked it as well because I chatted to Jim Sporliter from Paper Tigers before, and he was talking about transforming Lincoln High into a trauma-informed school. But he was so busy taking care of everyone, the children and the teachers, and holding it and, you know, trying to do this monumental work that he kind of forgot to take care of himself. So it just prompted me to ask the question, really, because we do all need, you have to care for the caregiver, whether it's a mother or a father or a leader in industry, I think.
That is so true, isn't it? And it's, you know, you can't give out what you don't have. And that's me back to talking about how sustainable is it? And that's probably, I'm talking emotionally sustainable. Yeah. How much can you do that if you don't practice that self-care? And again, I used to honestly come from that cultural belief that self-care was selfish.
Yeah, right.
I really did. And, you know, to be a really good person, you just looked after everybody else first. So that has been a real shift in my thinking. But I've really, I recognize, well, you can't ask other people to do it if you're not willing to do it yourself.
Yes.
And actually, you start with the adults that are present in the life of children and young people. And then you start with those who have got responsibility, the adults who are responsible for the children and young people. So we think about it like that a lot. So I've had to do a lot more in terms of managing my self-care without expecting other people to manage my feelings for me. And I think I was very guilty of doing that previously as well. So I could have big emotional outbursts because, again, not practicing self-care and then expecting other people to be able to cope with my behaviours, which were unacceptable. So, and that's damaging in relationships. And I've recognised that actually, and I'm not willing to do that anymore. So I can take care of me. I've got the power to do that, but I need space and I need time, and I need a great network of people who just allow you to talk and won't try and fix any of it.
And that co-regulation, just listening sometimes is just enough. You don't really need to say anything or dole out any advice, just hold the space.
Absolutely. There's therapeutic moments everywhere, isn't there? Without having to be a therapist, or, you know, just to sit alongside somebody and say, I hear your feelings. I hear it's sad. I hear that you're angry just now. You know, and we're doing that in Lullaby Lane with children who are 1 and 2. And actually what you recognise, Jane, is lots of the adults were never afforded that space to do that. So that's just fascinating. And I always go back to Bruce Perry's book of The Boy Who Was Raised a Dog. And he talks about Mama P in it.
Oh, amazing woman, yeah.
Absolutely amazing. But she talked about our support of the mothers. And when I read anything now, I always think about what would it look like in practice. And that book was really fundamental to the way in which I practice as well, because then I took that and I thought, okay, we really should be holding the adults.
Yes.
We should be supporting the parents. We should be supporting our team, who are then supporting the children. So we talk about Lullaby family care.
Yeah. Scaffolding all the caregivers in various ways. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that was quite a monumental piece for me. That was one of those wee light bulb moments where I go, okay, that's what we should be doing every day. So again, from a leadership point of view, then your job then becomes that you're no longer responsible for looking after the children and young people. You're looking after the adults who are looking after the children and young people. And that just keeps going up as the organisation grows or gets bigger.
Thanks, Pauline. If you can chat a little bit now about the ACEs framework, so the Adverse Childhood Experiences framework, because you are one of the key leaders in Scotland and an inspirational figure for myself. I know that word inspirational is bandied about too much, but really what you've done in Scotland is quite amazing. And I know it's incremental progress, but the cross-sectoral energy that was there and continues to be there is amazing. So what, in your view, are the kind of benefits of the ACEs framework, and then what are the limitations?
Okay, so I put down that there's probably 3 moments that really shifted my thinking. One was when Dr. Suzanne Zedike came to Lullaby Lane in 2015 and talked about attachment theory. 2 was when I went in 2016 to see Dr. Bruce Perry in Edinburgh. children in Scotland were running a thing, which was just fantastic. And he talked about the neurosequential model, and he talked about regulate, relate, and reason, and it made so much sense to me. And then the third thing was when I seen the resilience documentary in 2017, when the premiere was in Glasgow. And what it did was, it was simplistic, I get that. But what it did was allow somebody like me, who was non-academic and had not studied all of this for 20 years, it gave me an inroad to understand that actually those outcomes aren't inevitable. So the amount of adversity faced in childhood, we're not determining that people are going to have negative outcomes, but the probability increases. But the format of that documentary actually really helped me, and well done to James Redford for pulling that together in a 50-minute time. The animation, along with the personal stories, along with the science that wasn't too scary. So those three things fundamentally changed the way in which I think I lead and the way in which I live. And then the actual ACEs model itself, if I think about what we chose to do after that, what we chose to do after that was raise that awareness for other people. Because what happened after each of the showings of the resilience documentary is that people spoke, Jane. People told their stories to each other in a shared space. And as you said, it was people from cross-sector, which I hadn't seen before. I had been to events that was all about apprenticeships with young people. I'd been to events that was about early years, but I had very few times that I'd been to events where there was people from education and health and justice and policing all sitting in one room. And I thought that was extremely powerful. And then you started to recognize that there was different people from different organizations and different sectors trying to think about change. But the common theme that came out every time was the power of relationships. And I think from the ACE Aware Nation was a conference, Jane. It was a conference that we came up with a name for that conference to try and help people to learn more about the science that's sitting behind development and child development and adverse childhood experiences. But every speaker that spoke was talking about the power of relationships. So the model in itself is limiting, and it needs to be much more nuanced than that. It needs to be, because it's not inevitable. It's dependent on the relationships that you have in your life. It might depend on the dose of adversity that you have faced, social economic impact. All of that comes into play, and it all has to be taken into consideration. But actually, I think with what we were trying to do with the ACE Aware Nation was give people a starting point, somewhere where the science wasn't too scary, Jane, because it's all right if you're in the academic field. But for Joe Public like me, who's in business, sometimes you go, well, that's got nothing to do with me. That's over my head. I don't really understand that. So the model was simplistic enough to give people a start place. And then it needed much more nuance around that and much more discussion around relationships. And I do believe the ACE Aware Nation has done that and has achieved that. So it was never about saying to people, you should now go out and start scoring people. You should now be making diagnosis on people's scores. It wasn't about that. And I have listened to people who really understand in their developmental history, help them to make sense of themselves. And my answer to that is then, how can you tell somebody that that's limiting to them? There's a slight arrogance in that. And I'm using the word arrogance deliberately, because to tell somebody else that model can't help you because it's limiting, when that person is saying, but that's helped me to make sense of who I am. Well, I don't think we've got a right to do that.
Indeed.
So, but again, and I recognize what happened in Scotland, and I recognize some of the fear that came in, that all of a sudden people thought this is about going into classrooms and scoring children. This is about negating the impact of poverty. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So of course it's limiting, but it was also a lot of value in because people weren't really talking about trauma. And people are using the word trauma now much more frequently. And I think that is because of, I think that's because of a lot of the debate that came around ACEs, and people have shifted to use language of trauma. And somebody like me again says, well, what's really the, why are we fighting over language? So now you'll see things like trauma informed, trauma responsive, you know, attachment led. Okay, are they not just all the same thing? Are they not all trying to make sense of how we grow, how we develop, how does our brains develop? What is the impact of relationships and experiences? What is the impact of the environment in which you're born into? And here's the power of relationships, the relationship with yourself and with other people, that actually means that certain predicted outcomes don't have to be inevitable. But we get fearful about language a lot, and language is important, but we get fearful of it. And I think then people have been reluctant to use the term ACEs. Yeah. So people will even say things like adverse childhood experiences, and you go, okay, that's ACEs. But what ACEs did was it captured people quickly because they hadn't heard it before. And of course it's ACEs, so the word ACE stands out to people. So I think it actually brought more people into a conversation that maybe wouldn't have otherwise been part of that conversation. And I think that's what's really important. That line in Resilience where she says you give the science to people and they'll come up with wise solutions. I think that was the best line in the whole documentary, because that's true. And I am not taking away anything from my academic colleagues who spend their life researching this. I think that's so important. So I have my limitations in terms of debate and discussion. I respect that. But I also know that knowing this, I'm at practice level where I can make change in people's life immediately. I can change the culture of our organisation, the way in which we practice the policies we have, the way in which we welcome our children into Lullaby Lane, how we relate with our young people at Tigers. I don't have to go through years of researching that. I don't have to go through, up and down the hierarchy of making decisions. I can make decisions quickly. So we can impact practice. And I think that is why our relationship with Suzanne Zeedyk has been so important, because she brings the theory and we bring the practice, and the two don't really work without each other. So it becomes really quite powerful. Yeah. So I accept the model has limitations, but I also think there was a lot of value. Yeah. So if you look in Scotland of what's happening with the trauma-informed lawyers, and the work of people like Ian Smith and Melissa Rutherford, and they are trying to make impact and change within their sector. They wouldn't have known, and Ian will say that, they wouldn't have known that without having seen that Resilience documentary and understanding pieces. So it started there. And Ian doesn't have the time or energy, I suspect, to debate too much about that. He's away trying to make change within the sector in which he works in. And actually, he doesn't have to do that. He doesn't have to do that in his job. He's chosen morally that that's what he wants to do. And I'm extremely admiring of that. Jen Newson takes that knowledge and she puts it into practice in her school in Pachuca East. There's lots of examples of that. Nikki Murray, Mary Glasgow at Children First. So lots of people in organisations, and the head of their organisation are taking this knowledge and they're putting it into policy and practice, which is changing lives for children and young people and families, which I think is really powerful.
It is powerful. And when you mentioned that Ace Aware Nation was a conference, it was a conference with over 3,000 people, if I recall correctly. It was massive, the first one, and subsequent huge numbers of people.
It was, and I think what that said to me, Jane, was people want to know this. And when we set up the conference, actually, my colleague Julie Day, who you know, Julie said, and Julie was fundamental in the part of organising it all, I want people to have an experience. We want people to feel emotionally connected. That was something she said early on. And I think that was right. It wasn't a conference of just coming along and sitting, listening to people speaking. There was lots of time for interaction. There was the centric circles that we did with yourself, where you presented some of your work. We had mindfulness in the morning. We just created lots of opportunity for people to actually come together and to connect and to take away what were ultimately stories. Yeah. The person that offered the most science on the day was Nadine Burke-Harris. Dr. Burke-Harris. The rest of the people told stories of what they were doing with this knowledge and information, which means if Pauline Scott can do it, who's not an academic, who's not a child psychologist, okay, then you can do it. Now,
Yeah.
some people might think, well, Pauline Scott's got no business to talk about this. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of only experts in their field can dare to say anything about a particular topic. Whereas I'm of your mindset that this is information that needs to be in the hands of absolutely everyone. You know, even children benefit from knowing about attachment and brain development and survival responses.
Absolutely.
Hugely.
And I totally respect my colleagues who disagreed with that, and I do, and I respect that, as long as all those debates are respectful, that people have different views, different thoughts, different research that they have done. So I respect that. I think what happened sadly with some of that is that we tried to debate that and discuss that on social media.
Yeah.
And it's completely limiting. And actually then what happens is there can be debate, and it can become aggressive, and then people see somebody saying something nasty or what they perceive as nasty to someone, and then they jump in. And I don't think Twitter or social media is the place to have those kind of really worthwhile conversations, discussions, debates. I don't think it is. So I think that happened a little bit.
It did, but also going back to emotions, a lot of what crept in was emotionally reactive stuff. So where people had an ideology, whatever it might have been, and then they got emotionally triggered by material, and then responded in ways that mightn't have been optimal really for them or others. But you're right, social media has no nuance either. But when I spoke to Bruce Perry about this last year, he was saying that people who should have really been natural allies were butting heads, you know, so the poverty camp versus childhood adversity camp, it made no sense, you know, really, because it's all intertwined.
Jane, I find that, and actually the left have done that for years. So we're debating, and actually we're debating against each other. What's happening over here, and who should we really be debating with? Who really needs to know this information? Who are the policymakers? Who are the government that really need to know this? And I think that happens quite a lot. And what I think I recognised with it all was I chose to step out of lots of that debate on social media because I couldn't sustain that energy for it.
Yeah.
And I didn't think it was best use actually of my time to do that. I thought the best use of my time was to go and put that into practice in our organisations and in my life, and I chose to do more of that. And that's not again to step out of debate, but I just didn't think that was the right platform to do it. And I think ultimately what I heard from people who were even debating the ACEs model is that they have fundamentally the same ideals as I have.
Yeah.
You know, I want equality. I want social equality. I want to reduce poverty. I want young people to be able to leave education and there's opportunity for them, meaningful opportunity for them in employment where they're treated well and they've got good rights. I want an education system that actually is inclusive of everybody and not just those who are academic. So I don't think we disagree with so many of those issues. Yeah. So I think it maybe distracted a little bit.
I've taken a lot of your time, Pauline, but if you have a few more minutes, maybe I can just ask you about some of your work with Suzanne around attachment and child development. Can you give a couple of concrete examples of where you've applied that knowledge in Tigers?
So the number one thing that we have done that we've put the most investment into, Jane, is that we have created a programme for our team. So we had a number of sessions with Suzanne around attachment theory, and what we decided to do is that we really wanted our team to have three things. We wanted them to have depth of knowledge about attachment theory. We wanted them to be able to think about how they would apply that into practice, and then how they would articulate that. So that was the three aims, and we created this programme called Daring Ventures, which comes from John Bowlby's line of life is best organised as a series of daring ventures from a secure base. So we called it Daring Ventures. And it's a year-long programme. That's how we started, taking different concepts of attachment theory, and every single member of our team at Tigers and Lullaby Lane and now Paradigm have been afforded the opportunity to come to those sessions. So it wasn't just about leadership team, it wasn't just about the early years team, it was everybody. Wow. So that is now going into its third year. And our team are coming back and telling us that that has fundamentally changed their lives, the relationships that they have with their children, with their partners, how they are working and engaging with young people at Tigers or with the children at Lullaby Lane or the families, and that they want more of that. But I think what's really important about that, and I think what's been successful, is the relationship with Suzanne. And I think when you're delving into what is potentially messy and emotional, it's again having that person that can contain that and hold that. And Suzanne offers that. So our prolonged relationship with Suzanne and the depth that that's got to has been extremely beneficial for our team. So that's one thing that we've definitely done. And that's been a financial investment and a time investment to do that and to give that to everybody. So there's now 93 of our team. So everybody gets access to that. Some of the very practical things that we have done with it, I think came out in COVID specifically. So I think because we understood the power of ritual, we understood the power of connection, we actually recognized that when our team all went into lockdown, that it was going to be really important for us to create space where the team connected and came together. Because lots of our team will tell you, if you ask them, that actually their workplace is their secure base. That is where they find their sanctuary. That's where they feel at most ease with themselves. So if you just take that away from people and everybody is now away into their homes, how are they getting that emotional support they need? So we created lots of space for mindfulness sessions. We created lots of space for wellness days. We created lots of space for just emotional check-ins. We did that quite consistently through COVID. And the other thing that we did is we made a conscious decision to continue to engage with our young people at Tigers. So we moved online very quickly, but we continue to deliver rather than furlough our team. Because again, we understood that for lots of our young people, Tigers is the safe base. Their mentor and trainer at Tigers is that positive relationship, the consistency in their life every day. And if we were to remove that for 3 months, which we thought at the time it was 3 months, actually some of the damage of that could really set them back quite considerably, and the chances of them re-engaging would have been very, very slim. So we immediately made those decisions based on what we know and the science of attachment. And at Lullaby Lane, we did stay open for children of key workers. And I think that was really important because we understood the stress that families would have been under. And I'd have stayed open for all the children, Jane. I'd have taken them all in. But the families who weren't able to come, we stayed again connected to them through video. So the team would video themselves. They would send a message to the wee one. As a family, they could share that experience and talk about it and say on the video, okay, there's Joanne. Are you missing Joanne? And given language to put behind that. So again, they didn't think that the team had just disappeared from their life and ultimately not be able to make sense of it. And so we stayed connected to the team, we stayed connected with families, and we ran a series of Daring Venture webinars for the parents. Lockdown, which was really important. One, it was a place for people to come together, but two, it was to help them understand the impact in general of childhood and in general as being a parent, but actually how that was elevated even more through COVID and what might have been happening in their bodies and what impact that would have been having in the children and what impact would separation from the team at Lullaby have on the children and how could they support that. So they were some of the key things.
Amazing.
So, and I've got lots more kind of.
I'd say you were probably online constantly, Pauline, because I joined some of your online I Will sessions. And of course, I Will is one of your mentoring schemes. You have some others. What's the idea behind these mentoring schemes? What do you hope to achieve with them? Okay, so I think that goes back to your point previously about network. Where's a community? But it actually originated from the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, I think it was in 2017 or 18, and she said that she was going to offer a young person a mentorship for a year, a young woman. And she put out the gauntlet to say, would other women take on that challenge? And I thought, yeah, I thought I would have really benefited from that early in my career, to have somebody who was not part of the organisation I worked in, or not part of my family, but somebody just a wee bit further
away who could have offered me just a bit of that guidance and support, and people that I could have bounced ideas off of. So I thought, okay, I'm going to pull some women together that I know. And again, it was really important to me that it was women that I knew, that shared values, shared an approach about relationships and about leadership. And we formed I Will. And really the basis of that was to bring women together to talk and support women and challenges that we face. And actually, I recognised actually, Jane, that there was a bit of risk in that, about making it so gender specific.
Okay.
But women do face challenges that men don't face. And they have to be able to talk about that. And I thought it was really important that it was women mentoring other women. And initially it was just young women. So it was women with experience who would take on a young person to mentor. But actually what happened was lots of women came back and said, I'd love to be part of this. They've seen it out on social media. They've seen people talking about it. How do I get involved in that? Could I get a mentor? You know, I'd love to be a mentor. So actually the community has grown. And actually we've got 50 mentors this year and mentees, and it is an eclectic mix of different sectors, different age ranges. And we come together, as you've said, we come together once a quarter to have a workshop. Some of them could be in things, I think we've got one coming up that's about marketing versus branding. But actually some of our workshops, as you know, have been really focused on things like relationships. So Bridget Russell spoke at our launch last year, and Bridget talked about her experience of grief. Because she said, I can't talk about leadership without talking about who I am as a person. And that is now who I am as a person. And I admire that fully. And it was difficult and it's emotional. But it's really authentic. It's really, really honest. And for some people, that will be too difficult because they want to talk about management functions and they think that's what a mentoring program's about. But I think at I Will, we're really exploring the whole person.
And life.
And not just
life, aspects of life. Death is part of life.
Absolutely. Do you know, and I think what we've done with all of our online events, and I think you raise a great point, we've moved so much to online, but actually what we've done at the end of every event that we now hold is that we just hold a space at the end of that for half an hour to say that we're going to stay on the call. And if anybody just wants to have what would have been previously coffee time. And those great moments where you get to just reflect on what you've just heard, or you've had a moment that's been really profound for you and you get to tell somebody else a little bit your story, and you don't get to do that anymore because it's online. We just hold that little bit of space now and say, we're going to stay on the call for half an hour if anybody just wants to talk. And that's actually been really impactful. And again, I think that's understanding the science and the power of relationships that helps you to put small practices in place. And it will look like nothing to people. It'll look like it was a subconscious effort, but it's not. I think we work from a much more conscious place than we ever have. And I certainly do. So a lot of the things that we do in practice and policy, they're completely conscious and they're completely steeped in relationships.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be involved in it, and I've certainly learned a lot and gained a lot from connecting with people and seeing your faces on the screen every now and then. Pauline, just one last question. You mentioned policy. It's one of my favorite topics. What can politicians and policymakers do to promote safe, healthy relationships in childhood and indeed beyond, you know, for all children?
I think one, they've got to understand relationships. They've got to understand how relationships are formed. They have got to be developmentally informed. I think that's so important. And I think if it's education policy and we're talking about senior phase of the curriculum for excellence, we need to understand early childhood experiences. We need to understand what is happening in the most formative years. And actually, in early years, we don't always get that right, never mind in any other policy. And I think it's about how do we get that science out in a way in which people can hear it and understand it. So I think the power of storytelling is really, really important. So I think we could do much more of that. We talk about sharing best practice, but if we could really share stories of what people have done with the science, and that could be used as professional development discussions, I think that would be really important. I think what we can do, those who are not in policy, but those who can either make decisions at practice level, those practitioners, I think we could get really brave. And I think we could start putting into practice what we know to be true as against working against our instinct. I hear too often people who know what they're getting asked to do every day, whether that be in early years, whether that be in education, whether that be in justice system, instinctively know what they're doing could be harmful or is not in the best interests of children and young people. And I think we need to get really brave and start challenging that. And I always feel for people who are in a position where they don't think they can make that change. But I think we need to get really, really brave. I think our ability at Lullaby Lane, for example, in our attachment-led practice, I think there will be people that might come in and inspect our nursery and not necessarily agree with our method.
Right.
I think that's because it will depend on how much they know, Jane.
Yeah, sure.
The way that we combat that is to keep giving that knowledge to our team, so they feel confident to know why they're doing what they're doing, that we just didn't make it up off the cuff, that there's a science and there's a rationale behind it all, because otherwise things like attachment and relationships can sound quite sweet.
Yeah, and soft. It's
lovely. You go to Lullaby Lane for your nurture. So I think when we start to say, no, this is steeped in neuroscience and brain development, and we've got our team looking at, images of neural pathways and synapses, like this is complex. And actually we can take it and put it into practice. So I think what we could do is we could be telling more stories, but I think those in policy and those in decision making, they have to be brave. They have to be willing to fundamentally look at themselves, because you can't explore attachment or relationships or trauma without actually doing some sort of self-reflection.
Oh, true.
And that's when I think it gets scary for people. So
yeah,
and I think COVID has given us an opportunity maybe to get a wee bit braver, because what we've recognized is that there is other ways, and maybe this is a time for people to truly reflect.
Yeah, indeed. Well, if we didn't know the importance of relationships before COVID, I think many of us know about it now, that we've had the lack of them, or our circles have shrunk massively. So it's a fair point.
And it's impacted everybody, Jane.
Yes.
That's the point of COVID. It's not just that group that's been impacted. Everybody has been impacted personally.
Yeah. Not a them and us thing anymore.
Absolutely. So people have seen what's happened when they have been socially distant and disconnected and not had their network of support round about them, and felt that isolation. And I think we've all felt that at some point. So people start to see actually how powerful relationships are in their life, but also they're complex. We are complex.
They are indeed. Well, Pauline, I hope I see you in Glasgow or somewhere this year. It would be really nice. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, Pauline.
You're so welcome. I hope I haven't talked too much.
No, it's been beautiful. Thanks again. This has been Law and Justice with me, Jane Mulcahy, and my beautiful, wonderful, smart, emotional and supportive guest was Pauline Scott from Tigers. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jane.